thank you all for coming. I just want to do a quick plug in this morning. I know this is a daytime meeting, so it's lit, and I'll do another reminder before the next meeting, which is a night meeting, but we've had recent break-ins into our cars in the front parking lot during night meetings, so please remember to lock your car and keep valuables out of it for meetings here, and to be aware of your surroundings. Maybe park under the lights, so if possible.
From the bad neighborhood across the street?
I have no idea.
I mean, what's out here?
Yeah, right.
That's what we wanted to know too. And it was a meeting in session. It wasn't like midnight, it was 8 p.m. You know, like.
This is the current one.
Yeah, yes, I know it says draft, but it's the same one as the printed one. So here's a sign-in sheet if you don't mind signing in, and here's an agenda. Dan, would you mind passing down, is there an agenda? Yeah, if you could pass those down.
One left here.
No, we've got several right here.
Okay. Are there a bunch? Okay.
All right, so if we want to go around and get introductions, there's a lot of new faces.
I'll start. I'm Roger Rayle. I'm chair of CARD, chair of Services for Safe Water, and I'm in my 26th year watching over this Paul Gelman one for Dioxane groundwater contamination as a citizen volunteer.
I'm Shauna Milkey, Ann Arbor resident, and I'm the secretary for CARD.
I'm Matt Knott. I'm the environmental coordinator for the city of Ann Arbor.
Kathy Knowles, Scioto Township trustee and CARD rep.
Vince Caruso, board member of CARD, board member of the Sierra Club Grand Valley Group, and coordinating member for the Allen Creek Watershed Group.
Jump to the back.
Why don't we go around twice?
Intergroups.
Oh, I'm Dan Hamill. I'm the DEQ project manager for the Gelman site, and my office is in Jackson.
Jennifer Kahn, Washtenaw County Health Department's public health engineer.
Mike Moran, Ann Arbor Township supervisor.
Kevin Lund, DEQ. I support Dan in the engineering project.
Mitch Edelman. I'm also with DEQ's Remediation and Redevelopment Division, part of the Gelman team.
Brian Nail, the Assistant Attorney General, assigned to the case.
Priscilla Cheever, I live in the Westover Hills neighborhood, which was one of the original sites of contamination.
Beth Collins, resident of Ann Arbor and lives right on the Plume also.
Marsha Haddix, property owner off of Niagara.
Jim Crowfoot, Scioto Township resident.
Bob Bailey, Scioto Township resident.
Bryce Kelly, Scioto Township manager.
Steve Neal, Scioto Township resident.
Kathleen McDonald, I work with the University of Michigan's Environment, Health and Safety Department.
Cynthia Price, I'm an Ann Arbor resident, but I have been an environmental activist on the west side of the state.
I'm Sarah Nedrich. I'm with the DEQ Remediation Redevelopment Division, and I'm also a citizen of Ann Arbor.
Max Pettibone, Ann Arbor resident.
Jeff, you want to give a quick introduction?
Good time to go.
Jeff Hayner, Ann Arbor resident and actually newly minted city council.
And do we have anybody on the phone today? Not yet. Okay.
Kristen Stakeholder for Washtenaw County Environmental Health.
Hi, Kristen.
Good morning, Kristen.
Hi there.
All right, so on to agenda item number 2, approval of the meeting minutes from October 2nd.
Okay, yeah, this is a board vote. I move that the board approve the minutes from the October meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay, thank you.
All right. Agenda item number 3, review of the October 29th EPA stakeholder meeting.
It's probably me, isn't it?
Yeah, that would be great if you could start us off, Roger.
It was an interesting meeting in that it's pretty well attended. There's a video of this up, and in the description of the video I've highlighted certain key points. Maybe I'll just go through that. Up here.
And the video is up on what website?
It's on YouTube, but I think didn't I share it with
Yeah,
Kurt?
yeah, thanks for doing that.
Yeah.
Thanks for videoing.
Yeah, but I just yesterday added the notes section to the bottom of it. So
If anyone is not on that mailing list and is interested in being added or would like the link to this, let Roger or Shauna, know after the meeting. We'll get your email.
sorry, I didn't get here. I only got here 40 minutes early to set up. I didn't have everything queued up here. And we're dealing with whatever internet speed we have here at the county.
So while you're doing that, Roger, maybe I'll make a couple comments.
Go ahead.
Okay, you can set it up. I was disappointed that the DEQ did not disclose early on in the meeting that we were at 19 part per billion at West Park, which is a 400% increase from 8 months ago. We have had close to 1,000 part per billion, 11 blocks upstream at Betts Park. And when I made a comment that the homeowners that have over 280 part per billion in their basement, if they have sump pumps and they're pumping that effluent out of their basement, they'll be in violation of state DEQ regulations. You can't have over 280 part per billion from the groundwater to surface water interface, and they'll be pumping that into the Allen's Creek, generally speaking, which is surface water. Unfortunately, there was no comment at the meeting regarding that. Unfortunately, it was kind of late coming out in the meeting, so there was not as much time to really pursue that.
Podlands.
Hi, John.
So that's the, unfortunate. I think it would have been great to have more discussion of that and what plans there are to deal with that potential exposure to homeowners and businesses. And I'm glad also that the meeting did include critical stakeholders. I think there was unfortunate that the previous meeting did not include some of the critical stakeholders. So I was glad to see it was a more open meeting and more inclusive, which I think is a good sign. And something we didn't discuss that Roger brought up is that there is a report out that 1,4-dioxane has gone under a river, or proposed probably will go under a river in Maryland, I believe.
Yeah, someplace out east.
Yeah, and so they were not predicting that it would go under this river. They thought they had a hydrological block with the river going to another source of drinking water, and now they're concerned that another community's drinking water source will be contaminated as it travels under the river into the next community.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that at the meeting.
No, I'm just saying that that's an interesting...
It's an aside issue. We don't know that that could happen here, but it happens elsewhere. So
we've had similar discussions here that the river will provide a hydrologic sink for this flow, and in this case in Maryland, it's going right under the river and into the next community, which is something that we've talked about here at the CARD group as a potential concern that Ann Arbor Township could be at great risk with all their wells and all the businesses that rely on groundwater.
Anyway, so here's the copy of the agenda in the description of the meeting. So these are the main points. David Dingle was there, Donald Linsinski was there, a bunch of other officials. There's an update from the DEQ and kind of back and forth with Michael Burkhoff from the US EPA covering these various points. A few times members intervened and made comments or asked questions. There was a little bit of time for Q&A. Anyway, but these are some notes I made here. So when you're looking at this, and I'll put the link up again in the video for this meeting, so you can look at the prior meeting, because I don't want to take half of this meeting reviewing what happened in the EPA meeting. That's one of the reasons we really wanted to have the EPA meeting combined with this meeting quarterly, so that we didn't have all this redundancy. So
thankfully you got a nice tape for us to view if we want.
Yeah, and these are highlights. So what you can do, and in fact, so if you click on one of these, it will take you to that point in the video. Let's put a chair down here.
Roger, did you have the whole meeting posted or just these highlights?
The whole meeting, and these are links in highlight links where they start.
But there is a link for just the whole meeting to click and start.
Well, this is the whole, this URL. The URL I showed was the whole meeting. And then, because I know people don't want to sit through 2 hours of meeting, they want to have just the executive summary. Here's some of the executive summary. So if you click on one of these, unfortunately, the start time works. So if you click on this, it'll start at the 48:04 point, but it won't stop at the 48:10 point. You have to stop it manually. I'm talking to YouTube about fixing that. They'll probably get fixed about the same time the cleanup is. But anyway, and feel free as you look through the videos to add your own comments to it. When you make a comment on the video and you use the time hours, minutes, seconds as the start point in your comment, that automatically becomes a link. So anybody else looking at the video and looking through the comments will see what you're pointing out. And that works on all YouTube videos, not just this one.
Roger, we have someone I'd like to introduce to make sure people know who she is. She's my boss.
I'm so sorry I was late. I had another meeting
Please
this morning.
introduce yourself.
I'm Sue Leeming, the Director of the Remediation and Redevelopment Division with Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. And again, I apologize for being late.
No problem.
Sorry.
That's a good interruption point too. There's several people that came in after the introductions, so I can't remember who they all are. Let's go around the room and introduce yourself.
Sorry, Laura Hindle, I came in a few minutes late also.
And speak up, because I'm already here.
Laura Hindle.
Okay. Who else came in late?
Jim Schultz.
Right. Is that all?
That's it.
Okay. So, trying to get back to that YouTube thing. Yeah, so feel free to, when you look at this and you say, well, there's a highlight here I think should be added, feel free to add a public comment. And again, if you do it in the format, hours, minutes, seconds separated by colons, whether or not you put the endpoint in, you might want to put a little phrase in that says, you know, look, this is the words that start off this section, and like I did here, the words that started and the words that ended, so you know where to end. And that's a way to share your thoughts with anybody else that's going to be looking on this. So I don't know if we want to say anything more about the meeting. Who else was there?
I want to say one more thing. That I was surprised to hear that at the meeting that the Michael Burkhoff agreed that this site would have been a Superfund site if the governor had not blocked it. So we have a change in governor. We have a change in Ann Arbor City Council. Those are significant changes. I think that those of us who want to see a Superfund designation for this site should consider that as an option, that we petition our new governor. She will not take office for a little while yet, but I think that's something we should think about and maybe try and discuss amongst ourselves if we want to pursue that. Rita, my wife, and I both would like to see a Superfund designation. And I think Scioto Township, Ann Arbor Township, and the Sierra Club have voted in support of that. The CARD group did vote as well back in 2016 at a CARD meeting to support Superfund as well. But it was not as official as we are now.
Right.
So, but I think that's significant. I didn't know the governor was really the linchpin on this, and I think the fact that we have a new governor could be important.
Here's something to follow up on that.
That rule's already come out, whether it's in the CJ or not. That rule's already come out, so that's how I look at this.
Are we gonna watch this, Roger?
What's that?
Well, yeah. The Superfund.
What were you asking?
So the other thing that surprised me was how they stated that it wouldn't be placed into being a Superfund site because there's no imminent threat to any human life right now. That also was interesting to me.
Well, that's their first step, is to make sure that there's no current exposures.
Yeah, and
Their next step would be to worry about future exposures. But their time scale could be an issue. You know, when do you start worrying about that?
No, I agree with you that, you know, it's obviously it's down there, it's a threat, but since currently it's not, nobody is drinking the water, it's not poisoning anyone right now, therefore it was kind of like, sort of like, that we know of exactly, that it's, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, please, you know, that's what I heard.
Well, one of the things that I think is important to note is that the DEQ had no plans to do near-surface groundwater exposures. As far as I know, there was no discussion of that until it was brought up by the CARD group. And to DEQ's credit, they decided to start doing some testing. Not tremendously extensive testing, but the testing that we've seen now does indicate that there is a concern there that this EPA hadn't talked about or discussed in prior meetings. But I do think that is another indication that this is really not being carefully monitored by the state of Michigan. And I think it's a concern of the residents and the community that what other issues are going to be coming down the pike. So for example, going under the river when it's not supposed to go under the river, exposures in basements that will be in violation of state.
I'll be
state
speaking
law.
to a couple of those things in my update. And there's some of those unknowns that are out there that we've pointed out. If we address them now, it's going to be a lot easier to take care of them than if we wait.
Absolutely. It was discerning to hear that that was the attitude, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Well, they're following the state. The
Absolutely.
state has decided that aquifer restoration is not their prime objective, that they only have the resources to maybe limit exposure for immediate exposure.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
So, for some that have attended these meetings for a number of years, have heard this before. Others, I feel the need to set the record straight on especially what Roger just said. I mean, let's remember that in 2004, the state went to court. We issued a decision requiring the company to restore the aquifer to unrestricted use using the then enforceable 85 part per billion criterion. The company challenged that in court, and the locally elected judge ultimately ruled that provisions in Part 201, state law, to establish this institutional control that we now know as the prohibition zone were something that the court in fact ordered. So I think it's less than accurate to say that the state has concluded aquifer restoration isn't the primary objective. We went to court and fought fight in court and lost that fight. And then a couple other important points relative to what Vince said. Let's remember that the state did initiate a shallow groundwater investigation based on the proposed rules that we issued in April of 2016 and designed a work plan that Gelman then implemented to collect shallow groundwater samples. We focused on the upper 20 feet because the pathway of concern at that point was this so-called volatilization to indoor air pathway. And the way the proposed rules were written, shallow groundwater was critical to assess whether there was unacceptable risk. And we, Gelman implemented that work plan, and at, what was it, 30-some locations were looked at, about 16 of which shallow groundwater was found. In 2 cases, dioxane was detected, but it was an order of magnitude below the then proposed criteria. So there, I think it's disingenuous to say DEQ didn't do anything about it, absent CARD's interest. And in terms of what, I'll be curious to go back and look at the video from October 29th about what Burkhoff said, because I've, since the petitioners to EPA requesting the site gets listed on the Superfund list, I heard Superfund say repeatedly that they weren't even sure that this site is eligible for listing on the NPL because of the fact, in addition to, I forgot, Laura, what Laura said about imminent substantial risk. That's one of the drivers. Another one is the existence of the state consent judgment that the EPA listing it on the Superfund national priorities list would not make that state consent judgment go away. So that becomes a challenge for EPA, and then that sets in motion this whole discussion. And if the group would like a more in-depth discussion, Michigan's been active in the Superfund process since Superfund was passed in 1980. We've got a lot of experience with the process in terms of placing sites on the list, the investigation process, the decision-making process, and the objectives of Superfund. So if the group would feel it would be beneficial for us to talk more about how the remedy today under state law might compare to a remedy in the process that EPA were to use to select the remedy, I think it might be worthwhile to have that discussion, because I think I heard what Burkhoff said, and maybe it's a case of me using my filters or Vince using his.
That's on tape, so we can
what the video says.
Thanks to Roger. I would like to just make a comment too, that I think it's disingenuous to say that there's nothing we could do regarding Superfund. It's state rules that they're abiding by. The fact that you can isolate this contaminant, and that's sufficient under Part 201. I think we need, as a group and as a city and as a state, to go back and revisit Part 201 and make changes to Part 201 that are more protective of the communities and protective of the citizenry, and less protective of businesses who have been fighting against cleanups. And I think this is a great example of that. We have a major company that's a $65 billion company that owns this site, who's a responsible party and has the funds and has the ability and does this work. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. They actually do cleanup of 1,4-dioxane in other parts of the country. This is Danaher. So this is not out of the realm. I think we need to revisit Part 201 and urge our state representatives and our newly elected Democratic governor to revisit that. I think it was a major mistake.
Right. What is the process in order to get these handcuffs off?
Yeah.
Because that's the way it feels, is that, you're handcuffed.
And it is moving. And I would just say that I am hearing from other communities that they are similarly frustrated that this is the law that our legislators put in place.
Right.
The
Not protective?
Yes. The
Okay.
DEQ can only do what we're empowered
Right,
to do
sure,
through the law.
absolutely.
Right.
And that's the limits of our abilities.
Right, we need to
In
blame
this
the
case, we also
politicians.
have the court order, which it makes things complicated.
Right.
But I would suggest that if you are sincere in your desire
I
to
am.
eliminate or modify the statutory designation, that you work with other groups as well, because I think in the past we've seen similar groups work with their legislators, and 1 or 2 legislators is not going to change this.
I think we have U of M concerned here that their student body could be affected by publicity of this contamination coming into the city of Ann Arbor, with student body of close to 50,000 students who may have a reconsideration of this community if it is, a lot of people don't understand the toxicity, they don't understand exposure, but when they see in the headlines and in the online that there's concerns about this contamination in this region, then I think U of M has certain concerns about parents checking from New York, California, wherever, and seeing that this contamination is a hot button issue in the city of Ann Arbor and in the area nearby. I remember CARD meetings where real estate agents told us that Paul employees who were moving, or yeah, was it Paul? A large group of people were moving to Ann Arbor area. They didn't want to live in Ann Arbor. They wanted the real estate agents to show them places outside of Ann Arbor because they were concerned about this contamination. So it's out there on the internet, and I think it's a concern for our community.
And again, the more uncertainty we have, the
Exactly.
more situations we have like that where people aren't quite sure what's going on. Now, there's some that say, well, just don't talk about the uncertainties. But they're there. And you can look at the Plume maps over the years and say, this is not going anyway anytime soon. So it's a matter of getting the proper information out there and also showing people that as a community, we're addressing this. We're not running away or trying to hide from it. We're going to take care of this.
The DEQ with that?
And we can see from the DEQ's actions over the years that they need a little help. Like when you went to court, you didn't have any of the information that I have.
In 2004?
Before the you didn't show the judge some of the 3-dimensional and 4-dimensional things. So he was like these people in New York. He said, well, seems like we could get away with doing this.
Well, they asked the AG representative to sit down and let the DEQ representative present the case because the AG's office was totally unprepared and unknowledgeable, and it was an embarrassment.
You didn't ask
court appearances. In the 2004 decision on the Unit E, I think that's a different set of circumstances.
But even how the Unit E got discovered.
Well,
suddenly it was there. Well, no, it was there all along. We just didn't find it.
all right. Well, I want to keep us on track with the
I
agenda.
wanted to say something before. You know, I share your frustration. I was at this meeting. I was very frustrated at the meeting. But I'm not sure. I mean, SIO has actively petitioned for EPA involvement. The governor is changing here now. The
Right.
DEQ administration is probably going to be
Definitely gonna
changing.
change.
Okay.
We'll have a new director.
Right. Things are going to be changing. And it's not necessarily going to solve all of our problems if the EPA takes a more active role, even though I wish they could and would. But, you know, this review for the placement on the national priorities list is going to take another 1 to 2 years, they've said. And then they have to do this feasibility study, which could take an additional 3 years. I mean, it's not going to be a quick fix. So I share your frustration. I'd like a quick fix. But I don't know, you know, this is going to take some time.
I did point out, and you'll see it on the video, asked, well, we've been pulling together information as CARD and everybody can't the EPA hit the ground running? Is it really going to take 5 years to define this when we already have it pretty much defined? We're just handing it to you? And the response was, well, it's kind of like, we're not used to doing it that way.
That's not how they function.
That's not how they function.
That's not how
They
they
start
function.
from scratch.
Oh, no, they said that this site is kind of off the chart on their scoring for the preliminary assessment. I mean, it was a very high score, and they didn't even include a tremendous amount of evaluation that they had yet to do.
Right.
So we were off the chart to begin with at step 1, and they had like 5 other steps to go. I think that, EPA indicated that they would have proceeded if the governor had not disallowed that. And I think on a point that Roger made about not running away from this, it seems pretty clear to a lot of people that when you start dealing with these kinds of contamination issues in communities, property values stabilize. It's when you don't deal with it, when you have this sense of uncertainty and no endpoint in sight, that property values tend to decrease over time and sometimes decrease pretty dramatically. So it's actually dealing with it is going to be a better outcome than just ignoring it and hope it goes away.
Yeah.
Or you move away, or you leave office, or whatever.
Right. And we need some authority that's bigger than what we have so far with all of us in the room. We all have to work together on this, because this is not a 5-year cleanup. This is a multi-generational cleanup. So 5 years to get it going, things aren't going to fall apart in that 5 years. There's still going to be cleanup done. It's just not going to be maybe to what everybody wants. But then when the EPA gets their 5 years done, then we're probably going to get more aquifer restoration. We're probably going to get more due diligence on everything that comes in, because we're going to be watching them just like we watch CARD or what we watch EPA, the DEQ now. We're not going to stop being involved. EPA is not going to be the Messiah coming in and saving us. We have to be disciples. I mean, we got to be involved.
All right, Roger, I want to keep us moving so that
That's
we
a good
get to
idea. I
all
was going to
these
suggest
agenda
that.
items. We can always return to this if we have more time. And I just want to encourage everyone who does watch the video to watch it in its entirety, because sometimes clips don't give you the full picture. So I would encourage everyone to watch the full video in its entirety. All right, DEQ update.
I volunteered to give my time up. I was joking with her. I just had a couple of things I wanted to point out. As identified there, we did some surface water sampling. One of the questions was 19 detected in Allen Creek down in West Park, down in the swirl chamber down there. That we did that last year, and it was 4.
So you did that test when it was very dry, which I give you credit for doing, and the city also indicated to me that it was a very dry period.
Right.
Yet, in fact, you tested my creek behind my house, and there was no flow. You had to go into a pond area to capture.
We did it in September here.
Very dry.
It was a very dry time.
So
just realized that where we tested the Allen Creek, where it was 19, it's incorporating a lot of runout, drainage, and runoff. So we did detect 19. That's not the only location. We sampled all the sister lakes, the unnamed tributary of Honey Creek. We sampled where Gelman, up on the river, where Gelman takes their daily sample for their NPDES permit. And I posted those data on our website, so you can take a look of what we detected in September. Those locations are also on the database, which is also posted on the website. It's an access database. You need access, Microsoft Access, to look at them. But all the data that I have are posted in that electronic form. And just realized too that Washtenaw County has reached out, and DEQ has got together, and we're going to be talking about that Allen Creek sample here in November. We're going to discuss that, see what maybe some next steps are, what does it mean, and so we will be discussing that with Evan Pratt and Jenny and Washtenaw County here coming up, and probably some of the other. I think Ann Arbor. I think Evan said he was going to be inviting Ann Arbor. So the people that, you know, could be affected, we're going to be having at least an initial meeting related to that sampling. Undoubtedly, we are going to be sampling, you know, additional samples in the future. So I don't have an answer right now, but we will be pursuing that, evaluating that 19th. So rest assured with that, if you can. I will be doing some split sampling, monitoring well sampling before the end of the year. I have stated that I was going to do it earlier, but I'm kind of waiting. I had promised to wait to give Dr. Lemke, who wants to take some samples for a graduate student to evaluate some of the contamination to see if there's any natural biodegradation. So I'm waiting for his working with Gelman to see if that is acceptable, if we can schedule something like that. So whether or not we can schedule with Dr. Lemke, I will take some split samples here before the end of the year. If he can, I will definitely be doing that.
Dan,
yes.
Are you saying he is going to be doing that?
No, he is talking with Gelman. Our relationship right now is, you know, we split samples, but we always ask permission. I always schedule that with Gelman. And so what I did was he requested that of me, whether he could tag along and his grad student and take some samples at selected wells. He had picked out some wells, so I passed that request on to Gelman, and they have chosen right now to say we're not quite sure. No, they haven't given permission yet. So he is continuing his dialogue with Gelman separately, because I'm kind of the middleman, and so I don't want, you know. So they're pursuing that dialogue with Gelman separately, and that's why I've delayed the split sampling to give him a chance to finish that dialogue up. And if we, you know, if it works out, I will sample the wells with them. If it doesn't, or is there a delay, I'm still going to grab something before the end of the year, because I need to do it at least a couple times a year. That's what I've been doing and kind of committed to. The pump house, you were discussing the pump house. I have a little update on that. I keep track of that too. Yes, there is a lot of activity happening. They've received their permits. The activity that you've seen, first off, that the pits that were dug and left open, that was to identify where the pipes were in anticipation, where the pipes come up in anticipation for this construction. So the permits took longer than expected, so that's why they were left open, because they were going to be opened anyways to make the connections. So what they're doing now is they're pouring a foundation. You said there was a brick, there was a concrete, that's a foundation for a new building. They're going to be enclosing the old building in a new building as they construct this, and keep the old building going, because they're required under the CJ to pump and treat. So they will be doing what they can with the new building around the old one, and continue with the pumping using the old one until they will do a temporary shutdown. They notify DEQ when there is a shutdown. I send out strategic notifications to a group to the CARD group and to other people. And they will do a temporary shutdown to make a temporary connections when they switch things over. Then they will finish that construction of the outer building and take the inner building out, take it down, and so they get to do wiring and pump. And you're right, there'll be a backup pump, but there'll still be a one pump system. They have identified to me, after I asked them, weather permitting, they're hoping to have that construction done by the end of the year. So you'll see. Like I said, you'll see some building. They'll still pumping, and when it's not pumping, I will be told. Yes.
Okay. You referenced a delay in permits. Were these issued by the city of Ann Arbor or by DEQ, or where did?
No, it was a locus. It was a Scioto Township permits, I believe. County. When I mean delay, they were just working through. They had questions. I don't want to say, someone was delaying. I just said a delay. That's why the pits were open, just so they can start finding where pipes come up, where they have to make these connections, and then then they work through the permits. So they have been issued the permits and have started the construction, I think, last Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
And so
wasn't
what-
the issue with this site high water condition they wanted to avoid?
Well, if I understand it right, that area is a low area, just a land, and so they were having a lot of water, surface water collecting there. Oh, what?
It might help to, Roger's got the picture pulled up. Is that the old building then?
Mm-hmm. The current building.
Yes. So what they, yes, and so what they needed to do, their people were walking inside with water in the building with electrical components. So they're going to be raising basically the floor, but they have to make all these pipes connections because that's a lift station.
And they know what they're doing, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they have a contractor, and then also they have permits.
It's a big.
Their
Yeah.
planning has been reviewed by Side Township engineers and that. So that's what the pump station upgrade is all about. So they can continue with the required pumping as required with the CJ, make it safer for their workers too. Like I said, I'm notified. I will be notified when there's a temporary shutdown, when they'll be connecting up. I'll let people know. And my first question is, okay, how long? And they'll notify me when it's done. But they're going to be doing making some temporary connections, and then as they get the final building done, they'll make the final connections.
Thank you.
And then the two pumps. Backup pump.
They'll have, I believe there's going to be a backup pump. Yes, they'll have the capacity where they don't have that right now.
Yep.
And again, the CJ requires them to do certain amount of to treat a certain amount of water from certain areas over in the prohibition zone. So they're just making it more efficient, and then also making it better if they would have a problem. Understand too, I want to point this out. There are, with equipment like this, there's shutdowns. Electrical power goes out, there are computer problems, that type of thing. I get notified when there's major shutdowns, and then I send out a notice, or if it's only for an hour, and like one time it happened when I was in a meeting here, by the time I got home, they had started to back up. I didn't send a notice out. So you can read the notices on the quarterly reports. They have identified there was a schedule when this was shut down because of electrical storm. This was shut down. So when any of these quarterly reports that Gelman gives me and I post on the webpage, that is summarized. Any of their shutdowns are summarized. You can also get information on the pumping of the wells. You can tell when things were shut down by the table that I submit quarterly, put on the webpage of the pumping of the different extraction wells.
Sometimes things go bad or break, like the pipeline. The transmission pipeline broke, the northern part. They think it was somewhere in the middle. They tried for months to determine exactly where, and they ended up shutting down the horizontal well that was remediating in the area and relining it with a new transmission pipeline, so that horizontal well was no longer remediated, taking dioxane out. And then a while later, the southern pipeline broke, and instead of doing that, I think they put a pipeline along Wagner Road instead of going down 90 to 100 feet with the other one. Then because they also had some purge wells along Wagner Road, so they supposed to connected all those back to the treatment facility at the core, where they partially treat it and then dump it into this tributary of Honey Creek, which the part that doesn't seep into the ground along the way ends up going to Honey Creek and running behind my house here, and then emptying into the Huron River upstream from where Ann Arbor gets 85% of its water. So for those that maybe didn't know that, that's what's going on. But they have to get water from here in the Evergreen area back to the core to treat it, because the original Evergreen facility they had was undersized. Could only treat to 500 parts per billion, and they needed to treat 4 or 5 times that high. That original treatment system, I will remind you, was able to treat to non-detect. But by going back to the core, they don't have to treat to non-detect. They're sending untreated water back along a near-surface pipeline, going down 90 or 100 feet, coming back up to Porter, going back down. Well, they were going back down 90, 100 feet. Now they're going down just probably under the sanitary sewer. Is that right, Matt? You know what the depth says of this horizontal, the pipeline here along
From the pump house to the core.
I don't. Yeah. Anyway, it's not that deep. It's below the frost line, and it's below the water. You know, the water lines, because you always put the contaminated ones lowest.
That's in SIO anyway, isn't it?
So that's in SIO. That's right. That's in SIO. So does SIO know?
Necessarily no. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think I have.
We were part of the discussion.
I don't think I have a schematic on that. And then, of course, it resides. It gets mixed with all the other purge wells, effluent, and gets partially treated down to less than 7 parts per billion, and then discharged into the tributary.
Which goes to the river.
Which ends up going to the
goes
river
to
through neighborhoods and over groundwater. We know that there's seepage into the groundwater because we got wells like, what was the one I was showing you, Kevin, that 11S or something like that? It's 11I. 11I was
While you're finding that, I just had one more thing I wanted to say. I will be, I have a draft quarterly report that we had promised. You know, there was 4 quarters, a minimum 4 quarterly reports to the EPA, and so I have a draft done that'll be out by the end of November. That's the next one, and then we will the 4th quarterly report will be sometime early next year. After the end of this year, and I compile the data. So that'll be posted, sent out, and also posted on the webpage. And that not only talks about, you know, gives an update of what happened in that quarter, but it also has issues and questions that the CARD group and other stakeholders have asked that we try to keep track of and answer ongoing answers.
Will you be addressing the recent October sampling results in that report?
The
October sampling, the results that just came in?
No. Basically, this report goes goes from the quarters that I have. I get them all
into September, right?
Right. Well, I have May, June, July, and August.
So it won't have the latest.
No, that'll be the next one.
Increases. So we'll have to wait another 3 months.
Well, that data's up, or will be up soon.
The data itself is up.
But your response to it isn't going to be up for
until January.
Right. You know, I won't discuss that particular. I'm not sure I understand my response to it. I present the data. That if there's, and kind of just give a summary of what's been going on for the time frame that the report covers.
Okay,
that 4th one will have. As required or as requested of us, we'll have a evaluation of trends in monitoring wells.
Right. Is the DEQ, I should probably ask you this, is the DEQ getting ready to tighten up increase the responsiveness of their analysis to address all these PFAS sites? Because if the timing is what we see here with this dioxane site, that it takes months and months in order to get DEQ's evaluation of the data out to the public. Seems like there's going to be hell to pay with some of these new PFAS.
Well, it's a much more dangerous compound, acutely.
It is, yeah. But if the process, if this is the model for the DEQ's response. I'd be a little worried.
I think they're different, handling PFAS differently.
Well, so let's, for those that haven't had a chance to listen in on webinars that Jerry Kiernan has facilitated on PFAS and the MPART, which is the statewide
Michigan PFAS response.
action response team, right. So as it relates to Huron River watershed specifically, a great deal of sampling has been done throughout the watershed, leading to the discovery of one likely plater serving as a source over upstream of Kent Lake. And even prior to the existence of MPART, there was this unregulated contaminant monitoring and surface water that had led to the discovery, in 2014, Matt, I think it was, of the PFAS in Barton Pond, and we also saw it upstream in the Huron River in Dexter. So after MPART stood up, there's been sampling along the Huron River and in multiple parts of the watershed, including, and I think Jerry shared the results on the webinar, and it's on the MPART website. You can see.
Yeah, Jerry's leading that group, right?
Right. So, well, he's leading. He's the
contact
regional team lead, because each we got 9 districts throughout the state. And Jerry's the regional team lead.
Yeah. So you guys are actually responding to that in a pretty good way.
Yeah, and
what I want to know is
good news is from early indications, where Gelman's discharging roughly 500 gallons a minute of treated groundwater to the unnamed tributary, which then feeds Honey Creek, which then discharges to the Huron River. The concentrations of PFAS at the confluence of Honey Creek and Huron River is relatively much lower than we're seeing.
What's the number?
0.7 and detection level is 0.5.
Okay. Okay. Good.
Parts per trillion. So that's
right, part per trillion. Yeah.
So 0.7
part per trillion was identified in the honey, where the honey comes into the Huron.
So that's
a PFAS.
That was a PFAS result.
PFAS result.
So
for the two,
do
you remember which ones?
Which one, Matt?
He's asking if
how many of the suite of, is it just the
PFOA and PFOS? I think
that was total. I mean, there wasn't anything, within that.
Aggregated.
Yeah, I remember.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was just a total reported number.
14, I think, or 17.
It might have been PFOS, I would guess, 27.
Conjurers.
So, I think to get to your question about PFAS and Huron River and whether our efforts on for Dioxane is similar or not, there's already been a lot of work. There will continue to be a lot of work. We've asked Gelman to do a records review for whether they handle the stuff.
Right, but and I understand that. Do you have enough resources to do both? Is the PFAS going to affect?
We never have enough resources.
That's
so
what my point is that
we do our best. We have had appropriations for PFAS. We are struggling right now.
Increase numbers of DEQ representatives.
Well, I think that's where the rest of us have to come in and lobby our legislators and our outstate friends legislators and say, Michigan is literally defined by 1/5 of the world's fresh surface water. And then we got a 6th Great Lake sitting underneath our soils. We have more water than any place else in the world. We need to be better stewards of it. And this is all the water we're ever going to get, and the rest of the world's going to get. We need to respond accordingly. We need to do a better job than what we've done the last 20, 30 years.
I would like to make a follow-up comment to Dan's presentation. Just to note that, in case people didn't realize, when we asked the DEQ to test in West Park, where there is one of the branches of the Allens Creek flowing through it, the reason we asked to have that tested was because it was relatively easy, because you just remove a grate and you go down and you have access to the water. The fact that that site has very high flows, and I ride across that grate on a regular basis, my wife rides across it almost every day, it's always got a huge amount of water flowing through it. And even during that drought, it was a tremendous, you could just stand over the grate, and I have videos of this, of large amounts of water flowing through it. And a former deputy drain commissioner indicated to me that his impression was that when they put that pipe in, there were a lot of seeps, upstream of West Park, and West Park has a lot of seeps in and of itself.
So this is the area he's talking about.
So
this
there's a
drain
lot
right
of
here.
seeps upstream of this site that they wanted to tap to reduce the undermining of homes and undermining of the roadway. So there's a lot of open pipes that pick up these seeps and capture the groundwater as it's going towards the river. And so that site happens to be a very high groundwater flow area, and I think that that is worth testing, and I'm glad the DEQ did test it. The fact that it's at 19 part per billion now is a little bit surprising to me, and somewhat alarming that it's jumped so high in such a short amount of time. And it just goes to the point that we can't just hope upon hope that this, contamination doesn't spread everywhere, because it seems at this point that it's probably spreading to the near surface groundwater, which means it gets, and this is what Larry Lemke, the geologist, said, it's probably already in basements. It's probably already in the Allen's Creek. It's probably already in the river near Barton. He doesn't know the details because he didn't have enough money to do all the studies that would, it's a very complex geology. We're glacial till, so it's all mixed together. It's all, very complex. So
here's the area that it's talking about. These are where the groundwater is near the surface, within 10 feet of the surface.
So the blue indicator is near surface.
These are a couple different a year apart analysis by Gelman of where the groundwater is near the surface. And there's little bubbles of up gradient here, all the way into what we already know there's 85 parts per billion of plume, let alone where it's this 82S. The only shallow well that's in that area was already 400 parts per billion and 390, I think it was.
Is that in the upper 20 feet, Roger?
No, but it will be, because this falls away. The ground surface falls away and exposes this aquifer. This aquifer will be at the surface when it gets down here, and it's already at 19 parts per billion.
I want to point out too, just since he has it up there, those triangles with the RL numbers, that's our borings, that's our shallow groundwater testing sites. And like Mitch said, we did it to 20 feet to identify if there was an immediate risk.
Right, and these are all non-detect, but you have to go up here to find some other compounds, and the two detects were down here near Slauson School, which of course makes you wonder, well, is the plume really closer to here? Because it looks like if the plume's going this way, it hit here before it hits here. But so there might be another pathway that's not shown in order for the dioxane to get to these guys.
And in keeping in line with Dr. Lemke's admonitions about multiple working hypotheses,
right.
Isn't it, can you at least acknowledge there are other possible sources than groundwater contamination from Gelman, given the widespread use of dioxane in consumer products? And
yeah, and these guys down here happen to be using more of it than these guys up here.
Not that much concentration.
Well,
it could happen. Somebody could be using
I just want to also point out that
a certain tide and just dumping it down the drain.
There's a lot of seeps in Ann Arbor. We have Worcester Park is a very high location, has seeps coming out of the hillside up there. I have a friend who's very high up on Sunset, and he says that there's just seeps everywhere in the neighborhood, that they have a lot of issues with, water just out of the blue coming out of the ground and contaminate, getting into basements.
Right. There's seeps.
So there's seeps all over the city.
As the DEQs can test for seeps.
This is the model.
And if there's dioxane there, then they know that dioxane is probably coming relative to the plume.
This is the model that Paul presented.
Right, I'm going to show that later.
Okay.
Have time.
All right, so we're on to Roger's update. I'm holding you to 20 minutes.
Good.
Time starts at 11 a.m.
This is all set up as a. I'm going to run through this quickly.
Yeah,
So
the timer down thing.
She's got a lunch appointment. She don't make it.
Not far from me.
All right. So everybody pay attention, take good notes, because I'm going to go fast.
Yeah.
So the Gelman dioxane contamination state is still the largest one of its type in the U.S., if maybe the world, even after removing 113,000 plus pounds of the 800,000 pounds, 80,000 pounds of dioxane left to be in the aquifer. So we're left with this now after taking out more dioxane they said was down there. So this is the Plume looked like in 1992. This is what it looked like in 2017 after 25 years of cleanup. And this is an image of the, these are all of the sample points for those years modeled on Google Earth. So you can see, you can watch the year change there. This is, you can see with your own eyes where the dioxane has been and where it's going. The judge never saw anything like this. Of course, when you made that 2004 decision, we didn't have Google Earth. But now we do.
And who did this map, Roger?
I did.
Roger.
From the Gelman data, because we have copies of the electronic
Thank
data.
you, Roger, for doing it.
It seems that, and I've got some emails I'm not going to show today, that the DEQ is not interested in having electronic data because they didn't use it. They were just fine with paper copies. This are the highest ever readings over the last several years around the site. I didn't bother putting the Plume up there. These are the highest ever readings for these sample locations over the years. So you can see the year change up there. And you can decide for your own, for the sample locations that were available, which way is the dioxane going. You notice some of them popping up near the north end, near the edge of the prohibition zone. And here is as pointed out, the sometimes these plumes move in very relatively narrow channels. So here's the Saginaw Forest. Here's the D2 as it crosses over near the First Sister Lake, in the Westover area. Here's the narrow plume that shot up to happen to be detected at DuPont Circle. By the way, these flow lines are Gelman's own predictions of which way the dioxane is flowing. And here's the video of Larry Lemke talking about that same thing.
All right, if we look at the distribution of well control points and the positions that we have known concentrations, there's still a lot of room in between here.
County internet.
We have to upgrade their T1.
Those control points. I'm going to propose, this is highly unscientific, just to help you conceptualize. I call it the Play-Doh model of plume movement. And this is my daughter working, maybe you have one of these if you have kids. You put Play-Doh in this machine, you push pressure on it, and it squeezes out these little patterns in the front. So if you start out with a pattern like this, which actually might be representative of the aquifer, the aquifer is not uniform across. There are places within the aquifer where groundwater will flow more easily than others. And you start the process of squeezing the Play-Doh through. I put yellow Play-Doh into the machine here and started to squeeze it through. You notice it comes through in some places sooner than others. And I chased it with some red Play-Doh, so you can just start to see the red Play-Doh coming through. And maybe that might represent a contaminant or higher concentrations. And as it starts to come out, you start to see a lot of variability. And the question I would pose is, what if the E-plume really looks more like this, than one uniform mass? What if it is a bunch of little stringers of preferred pathways, and have we put our monitoring wells in the right places to actually sample these? It's probably not like Play-Doh, but it's probably a lot more complex than the simple notional models that you've seen depicted today. Okay, so if it is more like...
All right, that was just a review. So this is one of the diagrams he showed as after talking about that. So you have offshoots that can go sometimes pretty near offshoots can go different directions. And whether or not we have enough monitoring to detect those. And this is just the E-plume. I've taken that back to Wagner Road because it turns out Gelman happened to find some of these channels in their Wagner Road cross sections. And for starting about 2000, I think 4 to 7 or 8, they've actually shown where there's some really high concentrations, and you can see they're not connected. These are like tubes going through Wagner Road of different high concentrations of dioxane. They're kind of like the spaghetti lines that you just saw in the video. Here's another set of them, and another set. Because it happens not only vertically but laterally. So you could have a narrow path going along a certain elevation, and you can also have a wider path at different elevations. You know, the elevation may be very narrow like this or very thick like this. So we're dealing, if you have, you know, one monitoring well, that might do fine for here, but you might need like 3 monitoring wells to detect what's going on here. Now, some of these have been largely ignored. Like the one here at PLS 0504, where they had 4,300 parts per billion. Now, the thing that's different about this, it's right up here at the top of this aquifer. So there was no monitoring well put in. We don't know where it's going. We don't know where it's coming from. But, you know, it's pretty narrow, because maybe just ignore it, because it's vermicelli instead of spaghetti. You know.
Where's that well located?
It's right here along Wagner Road, like about 175, I think it is, Plaza, it's behind
It's
there.
on the Gelman property.
It's on a commercial property.
Adults right across the street.
So here's a close-up of it, of the well log blown up to show where the 4,300 is. And again, it falls away, so it's less than 4,300 as you go down. But this has still not been sampled since the well mark. There's no monitoring well in the area. So this is one of the examples, again, from back in 2005, after Larry first presented these ideas. It hasn't been responded. Also, another area that kind of been ignored is GSI 9802. Now you say, well, 98, that's a long time ago. But back then, what was detected there was 7,500 to 8,600 parts per billion, the highest ever concentration east of Wagner Road, all the way back 20 years ago. That was discovered. So let's look at the monitoring well for that. Oh, there isn't one. There is no monitoring well for that. And the other thing about it is that there was a phase 2 report that I finally went back and got a copy of that had this cross section. This is one of the cross sections I was missing until recently. And sure enough, on the first cross section, these levels of 8,600, 7,500 are shown.
I have some information on that.
Just a second, before you talk.
Okay.
But then later ones, where they put that well in their cross sections, you know, 7 or 8 years later, 9 years later, they don't show the parts per billion. It's like, well, wait a minute, shouldn't these be shown? Because this is they've shown it for other wells. Why is it not shown for this one particular troublesome well that has no follow-up monitoring? Now, they ended up doing it a couple times in subsequent ones, but why wasn't it shown all the time? Okay, stop my clock.
Go ahead, Dave.
On a couple, you know, and I'm just presenting. Please realize I'm.
You weren't around.
I went around, but I'm not saying this like I'm choosing sides. Okay, I'm just presenting information.
Right.
And when I have a question, I ask Gelman. I got some information from them specifically about this 9802. Basically, they installed that boring and took those vertically profiled samples at 90, 110, and 120 feet for the sole purpose of evaluating the geologic materials that they were going to install their horizontal well in. So they didn't go to bedrock. They weren't trying to gather information other than get some specific information in a zone that they were going to install that horizontal well. So that's why they only took 3 samples and didn't put a monitoring well in. Then they did install the horizontal pumping well that we talked about a little bit earlier. Basically, the well horizontally, it's a 100-foot screen, and it goes right through that area. That high contaminated 30-foot, 40-foot area, and they installed
60 foot.
They installed that. They installed that horizontal well and pumped it from 2000 to 2005. They took a lot of water out of there, but so. I'm only pointing out that was, I had that same question, and Roger, you made me have that question. When I asked Gelman, I got that information that, not necessarily that they were hiding things, but they were, they had a goal with those wells, all the 98s, the 98, 98, 01, 02, and 03 were installed. So they could were installed prior to them installing their horizontal wells.
Okay, now I'm going to interrupt you. It turns out, I think 9803 also has some concentrations shown. But 9801,
why isn't there any
listen,
oversight?
but 9801 seems to have some sample points for which we have no data. Did you ask them about that? Why did you have sample results for 9802, 9803, but no sample results for 9801?
I specifically asked them about 9802 because you had asked me about that one.
But did you know that these were part of a set of samples?
Not until after I asked them about 9802.
So now you can go back and ask them what happened to the samples for 9801?
I can do that.
Yeah, thank you. Because that's, that's the kind of thing that I think we as lay people can help the DEQ, because you're short of staff and you're not, you're not necessarily thinking laterally all the time. So we need to help you ask the right questions. I think
and if
that's
this
what
is
our role
available
is.
data, we should have it because we don't have enough data.
Well, it should be in a database, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Instead of happened to be on a cross-section here, happened to be on a cross-section here, but not on the ones in between, and a no readily available database. And that's another thing I was just talking to Kevin about, that we have some of that stuff, or at least Larry Lemke does, that we need to pull in and say, here's what the data was during the boring of this location. Here's where the location is. We don't even have the locations for these. We're just guessing based on their maps. That's not part of their well. It's not like, they don't have like a XY for the shared with us. We know they have it because it's on their maps, but we don't have the XY location even, let alone the vertical profiling and where these sample points are. We're making decisions, lay people and the DEQ, without having all the available information. And I don't know how many times I've had to say this. Why doesn't the DEQ demand this? It's like withholding evidence in court. They have evidence that's not being shared. Why is this not number one? Just get this stuff all in one place where it's reliable, up to date, shared as read-only. It doesn't take 6 months or 3 months to update it, so that people can, anybody looking at this, any stakeholder wants to, Larry Lemke or me or you or the EPA. EPA can't even get to some of this stuff. Why don't we have that as a starting point to say, this is the data we have. This is the reality. Now let's base everything on that reality instead of assuming this and assuming that and ignoring this and ignoring that. to me, it's just astounding that we don't have that. And that's why, you know, if we have that kind of information, we may find some of these other channels and reduce some of that uncertainty that's out there. We know we keep finding channels all the time. So all this dioxane is coming from somewhere, and it's going somewhere. And one of the places that needs to be looked at again is MW5D, MW1 replacement. These are the highest concentrations at the core. There's no purging being done. When you saw those really high bar charts, that's in this area. There's the minimal purging at the marshy area up here, but MW1, MW1 replacement, MW5D, which just came in at what, 19,000 parts per billion in October. There's no monitoring there. And you want to know something else about those two? They're if you look at the
you mean no purging?
Yeah, I was going to say, not no.
There's no purging here.
Yeah, you said no monitoring. I just wanted to clarify.
There's a significant amount of monitoring.
So there's monitoring.
Well, there's not a whole lot of monitoring because these are only two. I don't know how they drew this bubble the shape it is because there's only one well in that area.
Yeah, I was simply trying to clarify. I thought you misspoke. And
I did misspeak, and thank you for correcting me. There's a lot to misspeak about in this.
Yeah, I've done it many times too, so I appreciate it.
The other one I would call your attention to is 410 Jackson Plaza, which is right here. This is a property that for a brief time Gelman owned. They did some monitoring because they had to remove an underground storage tank. This is after they knew that there was dioxane in the area. How could they do monitoring there and not check for dioxane? Or maybe they did and just didn't share it with us. Now they seem to acknowledge that because if you look closely at this area, this is the marsh area Plume map. And it just has a straight line here because they don't have any monitoring to the east here. So this may be the left side of the plumes. We don't know what the right side looks like. But just like MW5D, these are shallow. There could be personal exposure at up to 6,000 parts per billion within 10 or 20 feet of the surface. So if you know anybody that this is now owned by Big George's distribution center, maybe they should be told that there could be, you know, when you're talking about, is there any current exposures?
We don't know.
No one's looking. We don't know. No one's sampling here. We used to have some samples. We have the lift station samples, which are these dots here. But of course, those lift station samples are just what's in the current database. If you look at the 95 database, which I've shared over and over, but it's never been incorporated, they have some really high concentrations back when those were first taken. So this is another set of data that's just ignored. It's not lost yet because I'm still around. But it will be lost if we don't incorporate it, if we don't gather all that stuff together. We talked, okay, I'm going to jump down to the where the MW83S has about 400 parts per billion. And you said it's not within 20 feet of the surface. You're right, it isn't. But the surface falls away, and this aquifer is exposed all the way down.
Where's West Park on that?
Right here.
So that's West Park.
Right. And by the way,
their
surface elevation here is a little misleading because this is like 7th Street here. So you got to take any of their surface depictions with a grain of salt.
Well, Roger, can I make just a point on 82? When they vertically sampled 82 and put that well in, they collected water samples as they were going down.
Right.
And then they decided to set the screen at the interval that
where the highest concentration was. Right.
Well, they intersected the water surface right at the very beginning, near the, and it was not attacked, not attacked. And they put the screen at the location, 20 or 30 feet within the water, you know, that saturated zone.
Right in the middle of it,
But,
right.
but with clean water, no 1,4 in the water near the surface, because where the screen was biased in a gravelly zone that had 1,4 in it, right?
Your point being?
My point is that, you know, even though you're saying there's near surface water that's contaminated, it may not be contaminated because the contamination is deeper in that shallower unit because there's clean water.
There's clean water up here.
Yeah, we've observed
Which
in
are
many locations, in fact.
Which are partly collected by the drain because the drain goes near there.
In nearly all the samples that have been collected east of Wagner, in the vertical profiling, they've observed 20, 30, 50, 100 feet some places of clean water before they encountered contaminated water.
Right, that's a given. That's a given.
I just wanted to
But
make
what
sure.
happens to this dioxane when the ground surface falls away? These are their aquifer cross sections. They're showing this aquifer vents to the surface. It contacts the surface. These are where the seeps are. This is where you found 19.
No, we found 19 in a pipe.
Right here.
A pipe that has multiple pipes that come into it. We aren't even 100% sure which pipe carries that 19 in it, because there's multiple. That's part of what we're trying to understand is where that water is coming from, because it comes into a pipe that has many different sources coming into that pipe.
The nearest one, and the only one I might point out that's this shallow, is this one. There are no intervening monitoring wells in here. Those wells, those RL wells you're talking about, were temporary wells.
They were.
There were no permanent wells to track this over time to say, well, what about rainwater infiltration? You know, if it rains more, it's going to be diluted more. There was no permanent wells for those. And neither are there any permanent wells going back to NW82S. This is one of those narrow channels that's not being evaluated. Fortunately, they put a monitoring well at NW82S. Otherwise, we wouldn't even know about this 400. This is the only shallow well in that whole area. We have one data point for that whole area that's leading to West Park that's showing up with 19. How do we know that there aren't other areas where it's like 100 already? We don't know because, again, these narrow channels.
All right, Roger, you're gonna closing remarks.
So it's good, by the way, you talked about monitoring on the peripheral. It's good that you're monitoring around the peripheral, but remember, those peripherals are just buffers for all of these township wells that are outside that. You know, you've got maybe 90, 100 monitoring points around the peripheral of the Plume. And if those happen to miss channels, then these other properties could be at risk.
So is there a trend going towards that prohibition zone right now? Is it stationary, the values, or are they going up? Northerly.
All right, I'm going to finish up with Dan's update. These are the sample results for October, as of October 2018, just last month. So these are the by the way, NW82S, or I'm sorry, 103S, which is your bailiwick map. That's 85 parts per billion. What, 2 months in a row they show that? That triggers something with the city?
Well, no, not 112 is part of our settlement, but then the Northwest Supply well.
Yeah, but this is what's coming, right? Let's go back up to the northern part. So these are the monitoring wells on the northern edge of the Plume, and this is what's happening to those. So you're basically looking at 2017 versus 2018. That one's going up, 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 that one's going up. And of course, there's others that haven't been sampled.
What part per billion are we looking at?
Well, the scale is there.
Okay, so
I just can't zoom in.
It's like 200 and...
They're all going up.
Or 100?
They're all going up like 5 or 10%.
Yeah.
Or more, depending on if you're on. But the fact is that these are these are creeping towards the northern, the expanded prohibition zone. And there's some really troubling ones, like this MW 130I. That's an intermediate aquifer, about the same elevation as, say, 465 pond. There should be an intermediate one here at this next monitoring where they only have a shallow and a deep, because there's also a layer that's kind of like this one. So here's a monitoring point that's probably missing. Anyway, I don't want to go into all the details on this. As we pointed out in the, I think Jerry pointed out, you know, we're getting into the weeds, and my comment was, well, that's where the dioxane is. You know, because you got to look at the details if you really want to know everything there is to know. So that's all I have.
I have a question for Kevin. What is the obstacle to incorporating the Gelman data in with your database? The stuff that Roger says only exists there but not in your database. What's the obstacle to getting it all together?
I'm not aware of any obstacles. I mean, we're dealing with the data that we get from Gelman on a regular basis. It gets added into information that we have. We build on it. We're reviewers. And so when Gelman prepares a report, our main job is to review the report and either disagree or agree with their analysis. And so we use the data to fact check a bit, in the sense that if they draw a model or a cross-section, and in an area that we put a new well in and it may change what that cross-section looks like, we'll look at it through a different lens, so to speak. So we aren't just rubber stamping what they do. We're independent of looking at it through a different way of analysis of looking at the data. In much the same ways that Larry Lemke is looking at the data differently too, when he applies multiple ideas of evaluating, you know, this concept of the clay and the things going in different directions. That's another idea. That's not any different than what somebody else might have. So
is that data that's not there important or not?
I don't know what data you're talking about, Roger.
That's really troubling when you say you don't know what data I'm
because
talking about. Because pretty much every year I show you what the data looks like that's missing, and it doesn't get incorporated. I'm not saying you have to put it in to the ongoing database, but we should have a database saying, well, here's some data that's been ignored that we'd like to archive. And as a layer that you can pop in and show people, well, this is what was there when the contamination was first discovered, when Mother Nature was in control. And I think 100 years from now, 200 years from now, whenever the cleanup is wound down, the people then are going to want to know, well, what's Mother Nature going to do with this that's left? What were the conditions? What was the data at that point in time? And if they don't have access to that data, they're going to have to wait and see what Mother Nature does then, instead of, you know, having running start. Why throw away data that's perfectly good data? And it's not just Gelman data. Some of that data is DEQ data. Well, it wasn't DEQ back then, it was Michigan Department of Public Health. But Gelman used to incorporate that into their database and then share it. Maybe you don't know that.
I guess I don't, because I don't understand what data we're not using. You know, and how important that might be or not important it is. You're referencing data that, you know, be more specific, Roger. If you can say, here's a piece of data that's really meaningful. Now, the interest in the 7,000 parts that you've identified as, you know, maybe has been missing since 1998. The reality is, those wells were put in as alignment borings to determine where they were going to put in a major screen. That screen, that pumping that they did on the horizontal wells, was the most significant removal of contamination on this property in the project. It was the high, there was so much return on removal of 1/4 from those general areas just because of those, the operation of those wells. They failed in 05. I wish they would have kept on working, but they failed. Have they gone back and put something new in? Not yet. Are we asking them? Absolutely. We've been asking them since 2005 to put additional work in. But the courts are the mediator on these.
Well, the courts hasn't really weighed in on it because.
How do you know that? Are you in the court?
Well, that's.
No.
I haven't seen a public. You think there's been hearings that aren't public?
Probably. That's what courts are about.
The original
No,
judge
they're
is
not.
long retired. Yeah.
Well, there's a
original
consent
judge is long
agreement
gone.
now, but that's different than, I mean, that's a recent development.
All these negotiations are going on in secret, outside the public view.
But,
Yeah.
Right.
Confidentiality.
That's not in court.
Yeah.
Well,
that's new though. That's not old.
And if you are not representing the lost data for the public, then I'm really concerned about it.
I'm looking for it, Roger. I don't find lost data.
So
You
where
have-
does your lost data come from?
So it sounds like a disagreement is.
Some of it's your data, some of it's what Gelman had accumulated from the available data as of 1995. Because I got a written authorization from Chuck Gelman to share the data for the first time electronically. And then when Kim Davis was in charge, we finally got that after several months.
So the
I
issue
have
is
the
we
diskette.
have the data are not in one consolidated database.
Yes, they are. They're on a spreadsheet. It's a CSV file.
I thought you said you were concerned that there's not one consolidated database.
Roger has
It's not in any of the official databases.
So
It's in the database that was official at the time.
So
But that database did not all that data made it into their
So who's holding
1998,
that? Who's holding that
1999.
file right now, Roger? Who's got that file?
Well, the DEQ has it in their archives because it's in the email attachments.
So, I'm sorry.
And I have it, of course.
Are you saying that the data are not being incorporated in how they make their decisions? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's not in their database, so I'm assuming it's not in their decision making.
Okay, I thought you said it wasn't.
I'm sure they have some data that's not in the quote official database because we can see it on their maps, including like some of the ones I was showing there. Some of the there are a little bit of this 1995 era data that shows up on some of the cross sections, but it doesn't show up in their database. You know, it's like, well, we couldn't validate that data, so we're going to ignore it. But it's validatable, and it's important because when you look at, like, it shows that they missed some things, like NW30D. Back in '93, the '95 data shows that had 9 parts per billion of dioxane. That's not part of the current database because what it kind of shows is that, well, they didn't sample that location for 7 or 8 years. This is the only well east of Wagner Road that was deep enough to be in the aquifer.
That's true.
Yeah, and
An aquifer could have been identified sooner if data would have been looked at that well. We're taking a look back in time and
that's right, and we're seeing that over and over again.
The decision makers process about that aren't in the room right now to defend themselves, except for you.
So I'm not trying to downplay the current topic. I just know we have less than half an hour left for half an hour worth of agenda items. We're
Perfect.
15 minutes over, so.
Thank you for being a timekeeper.
Well,
But
poor timekeeper on my part.
and I will again send you the '95 data and all of the documentation that led up to it. Should I send it to?
It's 2017, and we're making decisions in 2017, and you know, like the reference that you made towards the horizontal wells, those were operational. Those pulled out a lot of mass. They're not operational anymore. And so where did the contamination go that was identified in '98? Well, it went, probably got pulled up in that well. What's interesting too, Roger, when you look at 30D, when you pull up the 30D results, the concentrations were not detected until they started pumping at that location in the horizontal well. Gelman has, in their reports.
No.
Shall we move on to the next
you're,
topic?
You're getting into the weeds.
This is the
you're
same argument
actually
we have.
wrong
It's
on
a
that.
side
when you
argument
say,
right now.
When you say that there was no concentrations before the horizontal well. You're absolutely wrong.
Yes, please.
You're absolutely wrong.
All right.
Roger, can I just do like a 5-minute intro on the Lockwood thing? Just because I don't know that a lot of people know who I am and about this proposal that's going in or trying to be rezoned right over the Plume on Jackson Ave. This is currently zoned single family. This is all single family here by the park. The circle or little area.
Which park is that?
Dolph Park and First Sister Lake. So they want to rezone a single family lot where one farmhouse stood for many years. It was demolished about 10 years ago. And they want to place this there on a 3.5 acre lot. There's many problems with this, but it's clearly against the master plan in Ann Arbor. My concern is that their stormwater infiltration systems could push some of these preferred channels, which just a little background, my well, when it was sealed in 1990, was a non-detect at 103 feet. My neighbor right behind me on Ferry was at 87 feet deep and was a 2,900 parts per billion. So shallower, high dioxane. The infiltration DEQ, I know, and the EPA and everybody right now is starting a new committee, which I guess it's Kevin Lund and Evan Pratt, per Michael Burkhoff, to do more research on this. But it just can't be rubber stamped through. There's so many problems with uncertainties, and that's what Roger knows more about all that. I just want to give a little background. This is the current infiltration now on the site. Yes, it all infiltrates down into the land. They are proposing to put these machines in there and take all of the concrete, obviously it's going to be all impervious surface, take all of the stormwater and shove it down into these machines, 75,000 cubic feet of infiltration storage. How can we be guaranteed that it's not going to affect the Plume? How can we be guaranteed it's not going to come to my basement and other neighbors? How can, with all these different aquifers and the Larry Lemke spaghetti models, how can we be certain of any of this? It's just, I mean, for you to just say, well, we don't think so. I'm a geologist, and in my 20 years, I don't think so. I don't know. I'm not happy with that. The EPA, in case anyone has not seen it, I don't know if you've seen it before, Dan's boss, it clearly states that when you're doing stormwater infiltration above contaminated sites or contaminated groundwater, that unless you want to push the contaminants faster, then they should not be placed. Maybe we need to, the Planning Commission poo-poos, oh, well, we just can't stop development. Well, maybe where there's these super high concentrations, we should be thinking about development and being cautious with this, because it's very concerning to me as a resident. The last month's meeting, somebody said, well, if it's allowed to be contaminated underground here. Well, it is until you're pushing it closer to me and my family and my neighbor's wet basement. And anyway, I'll let Roger finish up on this, but thank you for your time and listening.
Well, the other issue with this site is the very steep slopes all around it, and then you have a park with a lake nearby. And then you have residential right next to it. So you're dealing with a very complex and tricky situation, and you just can't plop down a gigantic development in a residential area and say, we have rights to do this. And I don't know that the rights are actually appropriate given the dioxane contamination, the steep slopes that the city has incorporated into its natural features ordinance. preserving steep slopes, preserving green space.
Wetlands, yeah, I haven't even gotten into that. That's a whole nother issue.
You know, the city could be using greenbelt funds to buy this property. We're only spent 9% of our greenbelt funds last year, when it should have been 33%.
Okay, but
in
that's
the
not
city.
really a
Well, I'm just
card,
saying that this
no.
site could be set aside. It doesn't necessarily have to be developed.
Well, we might need it. We might need it for remediation.
You know,
Here's
with a change on city council, maybe we'll have, you know, an attitude that, you know, these sites need to be handled more carefully.
Following on with, you know, the monitoring areas. Here's 3365 Jackson Road, which was a former homeowner well. That's still on that parcel. That well is proposed to be plugged. So all we're going to have in that area are 2 wells that are at different elevations than that guy. So this is one of the key monitoring points. Now remember what we said about narrow channels. Here, these yellow triangles are the 95 data plotted at these are, all I could get was where the parcel is. So these are the sum of the parcels. So these are small lots, so it's approximately where the wells are located. Here's the one data point we have in that area that's in the current database. It was 4,000 parts per billion back in 01.
At what elevation?
We don't know. It's part of the data that's missing. Here's the 95 data. It goes back to 1986 to 1993 for that same location. So you'd say, well, it looks like there's high concentrations all throughout that area. Okay, well, let's go next door. Here's what it was on 3417 Ferry. Here's what it was on 3408 Ferry. Here's what it was on 3401 Ferry. You don't have to go very far away before you find that there's some non-detects. So there's some narrow channels going on here, and that's why we're concerned. And these are shallower, by the way, than some of the other wells that are monitored. This was probably the same elevation, although we really don't have. This one we do have. It's about 100 feet deep, but a lot of these older wells could be even shallower than that. So we don't really know what the channel looks like going through here. And when you start taking away monitoring locations and ignoring early monitoring locations, you're working under more uncertainty making decisions on this.
Does the NDEQ have concerns about these monitoring wells being capped and disappearing and overridden by development? Does it affect your ability to monitor and incorporate that information moving forward?
Didn't you say that was a residential well that was going to be?
Yeah, but it's still currently being monitored.
Well, there's also monitoring wells.
There's no resident there anymore. The house is gone.
Right, we're only losing the one residential well. The other, we're not losing actual monitoring wells, if I understand it, with the footprint it's currently predicted.
You're not losing MWs, but you're losing a monitoring well.
Which is a very old one, too.
It was my understanding that they were going to re-drill a replacement well. Is that still?
That is, you know, we identified that that could be a requirement depending on the what goes on. Just realize too that I'm going to say it again, and you guys are going to kick me. We're in confidential negotiations for implementing a new criteria. That means additional work that everybody knew all along was going on. So, you know, am I concerned right now with that one well? No, not with the information we have, and not with what knowing what's going to be coming, you know, that we're going to be looking at for implementing a new criteria. I've already identified to Gelman that because they've asked about, you know, what if about with taking that point out, and I said, well, I have a concern, since that was the only one, we may need additional a replacement somewhere in the area, whether it's specifically right at that location, but somewhere in the area to get similar type information. So they're aware of what our thought is. And so
can I suggest that when that one replacement's not going to be sufficient, that they're taking away the potential for more monitoring in this area by having this building here. So might I suggest that there be a range of monitoring wells across this whole at different elevations?
There was supposed to be a study now with Kevin and Evan Pratt about new developments, and can you elaborate on that more? And is it causing, like, putting in more of these bigger things, like in Maple Village? Did that help push it further west or east? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Maple Village. Maple Village was constructed in 15, 16. And one of the things that they did there is they reconfigured the parking lot to be more of a infiltration area than a sheet flow where all the water was shedding off and going into a pipe and ultimately ending up down in West Park and creating some flooding challenges. So Evan's team is trying, since 2016, trying to implement best management practices, which mean new developers have to try to infiltrate and put all of their manage their stormwater on site. That's the ultimate goal.
But what about the EPA form? Can anyone?
Yeah, the EPA is a guide.
Right.
And the DEQ has guides too.
But it says not to do it.
But no, it doesn't say not to do it. It says you need to look at this closer, and the department has been looking at this issue for quite some time, actually, since about 14, when it was first brought to my attention that the county was interested in applying a infiltration strategy as the primary strategy. And I deal with many sites that are contaminated. The largest one that I'm dealing with that's in the county is at Willow Run. And they're managing stormwater there, and we've had to work very, very closely with the developers there and that one has more of an implication because the contamination there is very shallow. And so any changes you make on the surface to create more infiltration, you're going to have an impact. Over here, what we're seeing is that there's a package of sediments that's about 60 to 80 feet before we actually get into the contamination.
Unless you have a little preferred channel.
Well, that preferred channel that we know of is down here at 60 to 80 feet. We haven't seen it in this investigative work that we've been doing for quite some time in sampling vertically through the aquifer and seeing these non-detects. And the geology, that's kind of related to the geology. The geology in most places here doesn't allow for much infiltration because it's too much clay and till.
So how many monitoring wells have you put in there to look at that?
Pardon me?
How many monitoring wells did you put in to look at that elevation? Was it 2 or 3 or?
We don't have any of the Jackson Road property itself.
The soil borings, maybe.
So we don't have any soil borings. So what we're looking at is we're looking at areas where we do have monitoring wells in the location on the old Kmart parking lot. We have
let's move back to Wagner Road where we're talking about, because this is supposed to be talking about the Lockwood. Now, one of the things that you don't have in the 95 data, these are the yellow triangles that are shown here are the ones with detectable levels of dioxane that are higher than
60 feet.
What?
All those wells that you're showing, I think, I recall.
My neighbor's was 87.
Yeah.
No, there's some shallower than
67.
that. In fact, you'd only have to go down here to find one that's still being monitored. The only one east of Wagner Road.
You're saying I can't use a site that's distant, and try to, but I have to.
Well, you're dismissing that there are shallow east of Wagner, but of course there are.
Of course.
And
I'm not dismissing that.
And sometimes the wind blew from the southwest when they were spray irrigating. So you don't know that there's not contamination here. You don't know that.
You're right. I don't know that with 100% certainty.
And you haven't looked at any of the 95 data because you didn't have X and you didn't find it.
So what is the action we're looking from the report card with this agenda item? Just keep things moving because we have 10 minutes left for our meeting.
Yeah, well, if you look at the 95 data, you'll see that there's places where there's high hits and there's places where there's non-detect in a very narrow area. And if we don't look at actually where the dioxane is moving in those narrow channels, you could be making decisions thinking that it's a wide plume when in fact it's a bunch of narrow plumes. And some of those narrow plumes might have really high concentrations because this is where MW90, again, it's not on the database, so I can't just pop it up. I have to bring up another layer.
Just check.
So I have a question for NDEQ. Well, this is the opportunity to ask this for me. So what is the potential negative outcome of this construction on this site to the direction of the plume, to the neighbors of the plume? Is there a possibility that doing this work on this site is going to push it in a kind of in a negative direction? Is going to raise it up, push down? What's it going to do to it? Like, I mean, do you have a sense from a hydrology standpoint, like what would happen if this went forward? Would it have negative impacts to the neighbors?
Well, thanks for asking, and I think that's the most important question.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to have to decide.
To change the risk.
For me.
Is anybody going to be exposed after post-development to 1,4-dioxane?
Right.
And that's why we're looking at some of the other sites too, where we have actual data, where data on the site, we got development, we had data before the development, we got the development, we got data afterwards. Did there change the risk to anybody being exposed? And in all of those cases, I got to say no. I mean, I haven't seen a case where we've been able to say that, well, the concentrations went up or down. These are in areas that nobody's using the groundwater for as a drinking water source, because we've been so focused over 30 years to try to address that issue and mitigate that issue from a direct contact.
But at one point, we were told that the deep drill was okay, or whatever that well was that we were pushing. Yes,
deep injection well.
You know, oh, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I mean,
it probably was.
Priscilla's,
it was.
Yeah,
they had contamination at the surface.
I mean, you're saying you think it'll be okay.
No, I'm not saying I think. I'm looking at the data that we have and relying on existing data that we have that shows that it's okay. Not thinking
that you shouldn't.
And extrapolating from the data.
Except the 95 data.
And the EPA form.
But okay, so we're taking, data, 95 data, it's very, very old. And does it represent today's conditions? Plus, all those people those wells that were impacted are all on drinking water from the city of Ann Arbor.
But I have a basement and I'm right there. I mean, I'm going to be, it's on my back fence line.
Would a different type of mitigation on the site have an improved outcome over what's being proposed? That's the kind of question that I would have.
I'm sorry, has this gone to the Planning Commission yet?
It's been in the Planning Commission. It went in May and it was postponed for so many problems. Then the last time it was postponed in September because mainly the dioxane concern. They were very concerned.
Are you on the Planning Commission?
I'm not.
No, he's a city council.
He's a council.
It's going to, the next CARD meeting, December 4th, is when we have the next.
Yeah, so
we go to Planning Commission the next then.
Okay, I'm very familiar with this. I used to manage the stormwater permit program back in the day, and I know Washtenaw County has one of the best stormwater programs in the state.
But on top of contaminated, I know.
Yes, and so I guess my question is, has anybody, before the Planning Commission approved something like this,
they've seen that.
Well, they asked. I'm sorry. Before they approved the development, excuse me, it seems like they would ask these questions of the developer, and that they would require the developer to provide whatever data necessary.
You think?
So that the Planning Commission would be.
We have a very permissive Planning Commission.
Well, but they rely on the DEQ to give them advice.
But DEQ, I think, is giving them advice right now, and that's what.
Don't worry about it.
We were asked maybe only about a month ago to weigh in on this issue.
But you've only heard their side too. That's why I felt like I should. I mean, I only come to the evening meetings because I usually work. I took the day off so that I could meet you and try to figure this out.
Yeah, I mean, I used to live in the sunny, in the neighborhood. There's several friends over there that are on your side that are calling me on a regular basis. Hey, what can you do? You got to stop this.
Well, I don't think it's going to go through anyway. There's too many other problems, like the wetland things we're not talking about.
Let him finish.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, I've lived in the city for over 25 years, and it's just not. What we're trying to do here. What I'm going to have to do is to look at this site and look at other developments in the Wagner Road area could they have any impact on the plume, and would that be an adverse risk? Would that change the risk analysis? Because that's what we're building all of our decisions on, risk. And I'm still doing that analysis. I'm supposed to have that ready for a presentation on November or on December 4th.
Oh, so you're going to go speak at the planning commission meeting?
I'll be there.
In favor of Lockwood?
With I don't know. I'm not in favor. I'm just providing the information.
Who called you to do it?
Pardon?
Who's asking you to go speak?
Evan.
Okay. Well, this is the first time I've heard of that.
Here's a question for you, Kevin. What time scale are you projecting out for when you do your analysis? 30 years, 100 years?
I was going to answer that question.
Good. That's not a good answer, but I'm
I
glad you did
just
that.
don't know what the question.
Because you're not even willing to look back
Exactly.
20, 30 years of data. How can we expect you to look forward for
But we have
20 or
we already
30,
have
100
like
years?
5,000 residential parcels that have been affected by the dioxane, right? As it progresses west.
Provision.
No, but I mean, we're pretending that the supply of uncontaminated water is somehow infinite. And if we screw up the Huron River, well, we can tap
Don't eat
into
the fish.
Detroit or something.
Right.
But it doesn't work that way. And the PFAS is in a lot of different places. And so why aren't we thinking about it's already spread under 5,000 houses, and who knows how many more it'll spread under, and do something about it instead of just saying, well, it'll all work out in the end.
I think part of the problem with this site is that I think we're adding additional uncertainty to this plume. And
Yes, really high.
Yes.
so you have a very high concentration at this site, and now we're going to introduce a whole new scenario into this region. And do we have enough predictive ability to say this is not going to cause harm?
Because here's
the homes that
two,
are normally not going to be harmed. Are we going
here's
to
two
introduce
possible
more
outcomes.
trouble?
Not or three. It's not going to change anything. Is one. Another possible outcome is because you've taken all the concentration and putting it down in one area here to the northwest. It might actually move some of this concentration faster to the east, where it's going to be in shallow aquifers and eventually vent to the surface and perhaps have vapor intrusion issues. The other possibility is that it might split this plume and push more of it to the north, where there's scores of township wells that don't have access to city water. So there's three outcomes there, only one of which is maybe acceptable.
So
And we don't have the data
forward.
to know what's going on, so that's the bottom line on this.
All right, so I'm sorry, Vince, your time got squashed.
Well, I'm just going to make one point. I've already made most of these points, but I just want to discuss for just a moment the pipe at the West Park and what that, in my opinion, is is picking up groundwater. It's picking up groundwater fairly close to the surface. Is my understanding from conversations with the drain office, former drain office employee. It's not picking up water that's 50 feet down or 60 feet down. It's fairly close to the surface. And what it was intended to do was reduce erosion near basements of homes, near the roadway, on the hillsides. So it wasn't intended as a way to grab stormwater or groundwater just for the fun of it. It was there as for a purpose. They spent the money. They said, we're putting in this pipe, let's go ahead and do these other additional little leaders, basically, that they installed to capture some of these seeps near the surface. So it's not like they're capturing water way down in the aquifer. It's fairly close to the surface. And I think that's one reason why Rita, my wife, and I suggested that we do those tests in that location, because it's very convenient. You don't have to do any drilling. You just pop the lid off. The city more than willing to work with the DEQ in doing those samples, and I'm glad that they were done, and they were done during a dry spell, which makes it much more illustrative than if you did it during a very wet event, because you're mixing rainwater with whatever's down there. So I think, I'm glad it was done during a dry spell, and I think it's indicative of probably what's in the groundwater upstream and coming towards the city. And unfortunately, I don't think there's any plan really to deal with this near surface groundwater. I think it's just a hope and a prayer that doesn't end up in people's basements and doesn't end up, near the surface and affect the
Vince,
community.
do you know if I mean, what I have here is the drain KML from the county website.
I got this. I have the city drain.
So we need a KML there so we can show where these offshoots are going to.
Yeah.
Somebody must have that, I would assume.
I don't know. The guy who's up on Sunset.
Once you work on that.
Said that he actually went to the city to tell them that these seeps are causing trouble in his neighborhood, and they told him there are no records of these seeps on the city maps. So
of the seeps, but what about these offshoots to the?
Well, that's the
drain?
same thing. Those offshoots were to collect water from the seeps.
Oh, so they were part of the drain. They were close to the drain. They just happened to be grading
They're
or something
probably
to live
10
in.
feet here, 20 feet there, 5 feet that way.
Right.
It doesn't go extensively. It's just because they have a pipe right there and they're putting in a drain.
I would hope that somebody has a record of those and those particular.
Well, they weren't kept as far as he knows. He was told specifically and
So these are like Flint's lead pipes, basically.
Yeah.
Okay,
They're
so.
old pipes. They've been in the
Actually,
ground
I
a long
don't-
time.
I mean, we don't know where they are, is what I'm saying.
Right, he doesn't. He tried to find out because his neighbors are complaining about all the water they're having.
So we're flying blind there.
Yeah.
It's one thing to fly blind when you don't have the data. It's
Can you
another thing to
wrap up or
fly
you
blind
ready?
when you do have the data.
Okay, well, it's noon. Some of us might have 1 o'clock meeting. We want to get lunch. So I'm going to adjourn the meeting at 1 or noon, excuse me, and then
And then
obviously
that next
those
meeting-
can stay to talk more or
We got a December meeting.
December 4th. It's an evening meeting at 6 p.m.
That's the same night as your
Planning Commission.
planning commission. Is it 7 p.m. for this meeting?
7 p.m.
6 to
at City Hall.
Yeah, 6.
But-
Planning commission is at 7. This
Right.
card meeting is at 6 to 8.
Yeah, that's a conflict.
From the DEQ's going to the planning commission, just Kevin?
Kevin, are you going?
Yeah.
Wow.
I will be at the card meeting in December.
Okay, thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
We could have a happy hour after this.
So I have a PhD in
Did everybody check in on the sheet?
all right, yeah, I did.
Jenny, did we get everybody's check in?
I think so. Working at
I did.
Somebody.